US President Barack Obama, in his final State of the Union, mentioned three major threats to security of humankind: ISIS, Ebola, and Russia. After this, Russia was quite instrumental in defeating ISIS. Russian scholars invented a vaccine against Ebola. Now there is just one problem left. But Russia has some experience in counterterrorism. During the last quarter of a century. And we worked out several principles on counterterrorism, and I will share some of them with you, just 7 for the sake of time. Principle number 1, it is that only functional states and legitimate governments can fight terror. That is the case with Russia. We've got a more functional government than in the 1990s, when we really got to deal with a serious terrorist threat inside our own country. And I think it was a very bad idea to destabilize or try to change the regimes or governments in the Middle Eastern countries like Iraq, like Libya. Actually, the functioning governments, even if you don't like them, are more instrumental to combat terrorism than dysfunctional or chaotic states. In case of Syria, luckily, whether you like it or not, there is a functional government. And when Russia came, the terrorists controlled 80% of the territory of Syria. Now it is the government which controls 80% of the territory of Syria, and that gives us some hope. Principle number 2, terrorists cannot be turned into freedom fighters. I agree absolutely with what Mr. Haqqani had to say here. There are no good terrorists. The idea to create Al-Qaeda by the special services of the United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, France was not a good idea. Though they had a purpose of defeating Soviet Union in Afghanistan. The idea of supporting terrorists against the legitimate governments in Libya and in Syria were not two good ideas. So do not support terrorists whom you consider to be freedom fighters. Principle number 3, true international cooperation is needed to defeat terrorism. We are now in Syria cooperating with the United States, but I would not call it true international cooperation. It's rather coordination to prevent conflicts between the major powers, not to really cooperate in military operations or even in intelligence operations, though this cooperation is absolutely key. Exchange of intelligence information. It helps. We are very grateful to our American friends and colleagues who provided us with information about the terrorist threat in St. Petersburg. Before that, Russia also provided America with some information on the terrorists who actually committed a terrorist attack in Boston during the marathon. But for example, as with the UK, we do not have any cooperation of special services, which is sad, actually, in the situation like that. Principle number 4, ally with those who are really interested in fighting terrorism, not just nominally participate in some sort of anti-terrorist coalition. General Rawat was absolutely right by pointing that it's very important to know where money and weapons come from. But as we know now, much of money and weapons was coming from the countries which are nominally inside the anti-terrorist coalition. We know the countries, we know where money comes from, we know where weapons come from, and it's not a big question. It's a matter of supporting terrorists or freedom fighters. It comes back to one of the previous principles. 5, regional powers are absolutely key to success in this fight with terror. In case of Syria, these were, of course, Turkey, Iraq, Iran. Involve those powers because they have their leverage over the situation. Whether you like it or not, whether you have contradictions or not, ally with those who are really interested in fighting terror and who can do it, and the regional powers can do it. 6, terrorists should be eliminated where they are. One of the major reasons why Russia is in Syria, there are many questions why Russia is in Syria. The reason why, major reason why, is because those terrorists who are in Syria have intentions to go to Russia, to Transcaucasus, to Central Asia. We'd better eliminate them there, not in places where they want to go. So don't let them go. Eliminate them where they are. And finally, deal with the sources of terrorism. And there are 2 major sources, actually. First is ideology. This is jihadist Islamism. And 2, the desperate living conditions of people living in the area. That means that dealing with the sources, you need to have something against the jihadist Islam, that is traditional Islam, mostly, peaceful Islam, promote it. And second, provide humanitarian assistance to the areas which are vulnerable to terrorism.